Good morning and good afternoon to you wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are joining us for our first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of culture, DEI, and sustainability. I'm Dr. Tiffany Ingram, DEI advisor at our office, where we help organizations with a proven, effective, and affordable solution for planning, managing, measuring, and engaging everyone to drive a more inclusive workplace experience for all individuals to belong and be productive. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Kia Davis, Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Engagement at LS Power, and Dr. Xavier Clark, who is a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Analyst, influencer, and content creator at Almost Famous. Welcome to you both. Before we get into the meat of our discussion, we want to make sure that you are familiar with some logistics. We are on the Zoom webinar feature, which many of you are probably very familiar with. This is an interactive webinar, so feel free to use the chat function to provide your comments with any questions that you may have. We will be looking at it throughout our discussion today, and we will also have some time at the end to answer questions. We have one of our colleagues from our office, Anishka Sharif, on the phone, who will also be moderating our questions in real time and chiming in as needed. Thank you in advance, Anishka. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end and afterwards if needed, as long as you provide your email address when you ask your question. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. Last but not least, this webinar is approved for both SHRM and HRCI recertification credits, and we will share those activity codes later. And I want to turn it over to Kia and Xavier. It's so great to have you here. And I would love to begin the discussion. I'm sure our audience would love to get to know you more and share a few things about who you are and what connects you to this work and our discussion for today. We'll turn it over to Xavier to go first.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Ingram, for that warm welcome. Everyone, my name is Dr. Xavier Clark. I'm a non-binary abolitionist, content creator, and DEIAB practitioner in the DMV area. A lot of my work centers around restructuring systems and institutions to be more inclusive, also focusing on the mental health of bodies of color and LGBTQ persons in workplace cultures, and how you can develop them to get to the next level in their career to be managers and senior leaders at some point. I'm very excited to be here with you all and have a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Xavier. Kia?
Yes. Thank you for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Kia Davis. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm in the New Jersey area. I work for LS Power, and for them, I am the strategist for DE&I. I help align our business strategy to our business and DEI initiatives across the company. And I'm also responsible for leadership development programs and engagement as
well. Perfect. Thank you so much for your great introductions. I'm so excited to get into this discussion. And just to root our conversation a little bit, we want to kind of go through some historical elements around Pride Month and Juneteenth, and then we'll kick it off with our discussion for our panelists. So each June, Pride Month recognizes and celebrates LGBTQIA+ people around the world. It also recalls the 1969 Stonewall uprising and its opportunity to raise awareness of issues still facing the community today. On June 19th, Pride Month intersects with Juneteenth, a day that recognizes the end of slavery in the United States and emphasizes education and achievement among Black Americans. The history of Juneteenth dates back to June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Ranger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and issued General Order No. 3, which proclaimed the freedom of all enslaved people in Texas. This announcement came over 2 years after Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had officially abolished slavery in the Confederate States. On January 1st, 1863. The delay in spreading the news to the to Texas was primarily due to the limited presence of Union troops in the states during the Civil War. Even at that time in 1865, not all states had freed enslaved people. Slavery remained legal in several slave states, which remained in the Union, which includes some border states such as Delaware, Kentucky, and Maryland. I would be remiss without saying that. On June 17th, 2021, Juneteenth became historic recognition and was signed into law as a federal holiday by President Joe Biden. This designation makes Juneteenth a nationally recognized holiday commemorating the end of slavery and celebrating the achievements and contributions of African Americans to the United States. But throughout history, the Black community and the LGBTQ communities have worked hand in hand toward collective liberation. Marsha P. Johnson, a Black transgender woman, and Sylvia Rivera, a Latina trans woman, who are two prominent figures and instrumental in the Stonewall uprising. They, along with other LGBTQ plus members of people of color, were at the forefront of the resistance that night and subsequent the days of protest. Their courage and determination helped to galvanize the LGBTQ community and pave the way for future activism. Without the decades of effective coalition building and community organizing among minority groups, progress would not have been made possible. It is important to remember that the fight just for an equitable society that works for all individuals cannot be achieved without intersectional education. And these two events recognizes the various layers of oppression that inform the people's existence. So I'm so excited to have this discussion around intersectionality as we look at race, sexual orientation, and historically, how these two communities have continued to work hand in hand, and how it's so important to really recognize intersectionality and what that allyship looks like in the workplace. So I want to kick off the discussion around what does intersectional allyship mean to you? Why is it important in the workplace? But I really want to start with Xavier, if you could just define for the group today, what is intersectionality for those who may not know? I think you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. I pulled up a definition from Patricia Hill Collins from her 2015 book, Intersectionality. I think she gives a pretty clear definition of intersectionality. The term intersectionality references the critical insight that race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, ability, and age operate not as unitary, mutually exclusive entities, but rather as a reciprocally constructing phenomenon. So they are working together to build upon one another, to build a person's experience, the way that they navigate life, and interact with the workplace.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Xavier. And I really think we want to see how does intersectionality, those terms, those multiple identities that one has, how does that show up in the workplace in terms of allyship? Kia, I would love to hear your thoughts around what people throw around this term allyship. You need to be an ally, you need to be this or that. What does allyship really mean? What could you define that term for the group today?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are several layers to allyship, and it could show up in several different ways in a workplace. So on a very basic level, an ally is someone who supports ongoing efforts of a particular group or several groups. As we talk about intersectionality, it's often used to describe a person who is not of the same identity, but they also could be in the same, the same identity, but they're an ally or a supporter, in other words. We also see it in the lens of an advocate, an activist, and also as an ambassador. So I want to talk about those things as well. So an advocate is someone who supports or promotes the interests of a group. However that might look, if they'll take an active role, whether it be raising awareness or educating others, influencing policies and procedures and practices within an organization. And an activist we normally see is someone who takes a direct action that usually shows up in a frame of social, political, or environmental sort of protest. is normally how we define an activist, but it's a very direct, intentional action that brings about some sort of change. An ambassador, I wanted to bring that in the lens and in the frame of our discussion, because I think it's a way, it's usually like through ambassadors that I want to bring it into context. And it's a way that companies have tried to show allyship, and some have been very successful in doing so, and some have epically failed. And I think that, we've seen that with Budweiser most recently. So an ambassador is someone who's vocal on societal issues and they have a platform or following, and a company might partner with them because it should amplify the company's culture, their brands and their messaging already. And where we see it be successful is that, where it does align with the company culture. This way, when they have challenges or they get pushback, because right now the country is so polarized, you get a lot of pushback when you align with, we have a very external support, when you show external support of a particular issue, or you can. But I think if it rests on the company's laurels, it's really a part of the company culture and it's authentic to the company culture and brand, then it lands very well. You have a lot to support that. And when it doesn't go so well, it's really not embedded into the company culture. It probably came as a surprise to employees, a surprise to their clients and their customers as well. So it didn't land well because it didn't align. So I think authenticity is definitely really important when you talk about allyship, advocacy, activism, and aligning with various ambassadors.
Most definitely. Xavier, do you have anything else to kind of add to? I love how Kia kind of broke it down in terms of advocates and ambassadors, in terms of under the umbrella of like looking at allyship. How do you see this is being important to the workplace as well, the intersections of what allyship may look like for you in the workplace as well?
Yes, I think in a lot of cases, people don't understand that allyship can manifest in two other ways as well. It's active and passive. You can show up as an ally, and that could mean that you just go to a webinar or you go to a meeting of a group that you're not a part of, and it ends there. But there's that active allyship where you're doing things that push the needle, not just for yourself, but for other people. And I think often when we think of a work context, allyship is kind of turned into this like dirty word, where we see it as, if I show up for this group, I might lose something. Where in reality, by sponsoring another group, you are building coalition with those groups and others that you might not even realize are looking at you, to develop relationships. And as my boss loved to say, social capital. You're building that in the building with other people. And that goodwill, that good faith goes such a long way to helping build a healthy team that's built on inclusion and access and everyone having a voice at the table, not just some people at some time.
Most definitely. And I think we already have some questions in the chat around intersectional perspectives, when there's this reluctance to kind of explore unique identities within a larger culture. And I think that is something that some organizations, many, like you say, Xavier, is kind of like, oh, if I support this person, or reluctant to support certain groups, how can we work within organizations to kind of help move some of our employees along in thinking about, there are many unique perspectives that exist within our organization. How do we get people to explore those unique perspectives and not necessarily be hesitant to understand or even to learn more about others?
So what I would say to that is, a lot of times I hearken things back to things we've been doing since we were younger. You've been doing allyship since you were a kid in school. When your teacher was making you do the golden rule, or you having to have conversations or be a part of a group you might not otherwise be, especially when it was like a group project or something, and you were put with the jock, the nerd, the cheerleader, and everyone had to commingle. That commingling in a lot of ways was allyship at its purest form. And so when people have that reluctancy, my biggest question is, where is that reluctancy coming from? Is it a fear of the unknown? Is it a fear that you might learn something that might change your thinking? Is it that you just yourself are nervous? And all of those things can be valid. But I think at times when we talk about allyship, we don't talk truly about why people don't want to be an intersectional ally. Rather, they are thinking about their own interests and how their interests might be impacted, rather than seeing how their interests could be actually amplified by being in community with someone else.
100%, 100%. Kia, any thoughts on the question in terms of for folks who may be reluctant in organizations to maybe even participate, as Xavier may say, the smallest thing of a webinar or just a group of event, a lunch and learn? How can we help employees get a little bit more okay with learning about others?
Yeah, I think we have to sort of shift the conversation. I think the focus in DE&I has focused on gender, race, and ethnicity, when really there are so many other dimensions to diversity. So as we bring that into focus and we explore everyone's identities and really like peel back the onion to say, you know, you're a parent, you might be a person with disability, you might be a veteran, you might, you know, come from a different country, you might be of a different era, there's like so much diversity to all of us that I think I think Dr. Xavier really hit it on the head when we can talk about, you know, rising tide really floats all boats. There's a common interest in it for all of us, and as we elevate one voice, we can elevate all voices.
Thank you so much for those insights. And I feel like as companies, going back to some of our questions in terms of like, how can companies ensure that these allyship efforts go beyond Pride Month and Juneteenth, right? Like Juneteenth was yesterday, Pride Month, we're ramping down the month of June, it's the 20th, right? As people think about some of the efforts that maybe they are still planning for their organization, how can we make sure that those efforts are intersectional and inclusive of all marginalized communities? I know some people will say like, oh, well, I'm not sure if the Pride Month events are for people of color, because they may look at it and see that they don't belong. How can we just ensure that allyship is there and present for those events, whether that's for Pride Month or for Juneteenth? How can organizations ensure that they are inclusive for all?
I would say for that one, I would invite all employees to the conversation. They definitely have something to lend, even if they're not a part of that group that's celebrating. They're definitely Black people within the LGBT community. So there's that, again, intersectionality and all of that. So they may not feel like it's for them, but it is for them in the same breath. So getting them to realize that, you know, you can have an experience or, you know, things that you might share that might add value to that community. Everyone, you know, everyone's perspectives definitely has value, and you may realize that you have more in common than you have different. So just bringing everyone and inviting everyone to be open to the conversation and learning from each other, I think will definitely go a long way. Also making sure that the environment is psychologically safe, because no one's going to speak up if they don't feel like they're safe, and that they have the support of senior leadership and of the company and organization and other employees.
100% safety. Yeah, I think is key in terms of, you know, being able to be psychologically safe in the spaces, whatever events or things that are happening within companies, making sure that there are safe spaces for employees. Xavier, what are your thoughts around allyship efforts for Pride Month and Juneteenth, and ensuring that they're intersectional and inclusive for all persons?
Yeah, so I actually would say it's three things. And first and foremost, I've been talking a lot about this with my agency is in impact over intent. Um, I think a lot of times when we have these months or Juneteenth, um, companies see these as bottom line and it's about money rather than the community that that's impacting. When it leaves, as like we were talking about, what Kia just said about psychological safety, it makes you feel psychologically disincluded when you go into a store or you go into your office the day after Pride Month and everything is gone and you're like, okay, so it's over. My time was up. We're done. And so I think that impact, understanding the long-term effects of that marketing or that programming matters. Is there ways that you can connect Pride Month to the month after and keep the conversation going and doing smaller little webinars or group activities that make people realize that this is a month because it highlights the heritage, but the life and reality continues. And that's my second point is the reality. And I think a lot of the work has to be rooted in the people in your organization. If you're only doing it centered around, you know, an idea or a superfluous moment, that misses people rather than you getting to know the people and actually elevating the people in your workforce. We love to say that we're trying to add people to the workforce from different demographics, but how are you impacting the people that you already have here? You most likely have LGBTQ people, queer, Black LGBTQ people who also are impacted by both of the holidays. Are you asking them what might look good for them or would make them feel included in the narrative? I think you have to ask that at such a fundamental level. And then finally, like you did starting this webinar, centering it in the history of why these things matter and how they intersect have to be discussed. And I think often in the workplace, we try to devoid ourselves of the realities outside of the 9 to 5 when everything we're doing in our workplaces are shaped by what's outside of the 9 to 5. And I think so making sure that history component is there can really help you understand if I'm doing this for the right reason, or maybe we might miss something in the way that we're programming this out.
100%. Even in planning for this, Juneteenth is something that is relatively new for some people, right? So, Xavier, I know he is born and raised in Texas, so he has a different lens of things, but I'm a Detroit girl, right? So in Michigan, it was not as amplified what Juneteenth is and what was it about. And we often see northern states as places, oh, it was, no enslaved people there. Well, that's absolutely incorrect, right? So the conversation around the historical elements are very intriguing to me because this is about geographic location. Like we are in these places, we grew up in these places, our businesses are in certain places, and having discussions about how people lived in certain areas or maybe were forcibly migrated into certain areas. And for me, knowing that my heritage of folks are in Mississippi and Tennessee and then came to Detroit. So talking about the great migration of people from certain areas is important too. And it's all elements of historical information that maybe certainly are not often told in our history books. I feel like Juneteenth is a very Texas thing, first and foremost. Yes, we are recognizing it now as a a federal holiday, which we are grateful for. But I think it is important to understand that there are some people in these places in Galveston, Texas, who would say, like, my great great grandfather was at that place when they announced this, right? Like, people are able to, train, like, actually track their lineage to some of this. So it is still very real for many people. And I think often we think this is something that happened a long time ago, when in fact, like, I am a granddaughter of sharecroppers and I'm very aware of that. And some people will just say that was a long time ago, we need to move on. But that is a part of my identity and who I am and how I show up at work. So overlooking the holiday or not acknowledging historical elements of it can be off-putting for some people. Kia, any thoughts on, we talked about allyship and all of that, but I think now we're going into the education how do we move on? This month is ending, right? We go on to July. How do we continue to talk about educating our staff and continuing the dialogue around intersectionality and allyship and the importance of acknowledging these multiple identities in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's about discussing what your company does throughout the year outside of the specific month. So it's a great opportunity to say we don't just recognize people of color, Black people during Black History Month, or LGBT community during June. We have ongoing efforts throughout the year through benefits evaluations, to make sure our benefits are inclusive, or pay equity analysis, or an analysis of where our leadership falls, how many people of color are represented in senior leadership. So just keeping those in the frame speaks to education. And I think also taking those moments where you can to embed it in the everyday experience of your employee population. There are various ways to educate. I think I'm just calling the framework. It was from the 1980s, but I think it's still relevant today, where it's the 70-20-10 model, where they explored that experience is 70% of how we learn. Exposure is 20%, and education, book learning is 10%. So I think if we're intentional about embedding it in our employee experience from day to day, the education can carry throughout the year. And how that could look would be in your harassment training, talk about the improper use of pronouns, or the fact that intentional misuse of pronouns is harassment, or and talk about different ways that it might show up in the workplace as it relates to inclusivity, since it's already framed in that way of what not to do, behaviors we don't want in our workplace. Alternatively, look at your leadership development trainings and making sure that it has framework around inclusive leadership, inclusive behaviors, and really have it rooted in your company values, your core competencies for your leaders, for your managers, for your individual contributors, so that it really has support from the company, and it really says as a company that this is important for the success of our company, as well as your individual success. So tying it back to those things and making sure we leverage those existing educational opportunities that we have in our companies to continue the conversation outside of the ERG events that we may have, but really pulling it through the company structure.
Thank you so much, Kia. And Xavier, what are your thoughts on it? I see already in the chat, folks are saying, outside of 9 to 5, when you become a human, being a better human is when you accept and learn from different voices as a source of uniqueness. You're able to explore your own intersectionality. So understanding that you become a better person when you are learning from other people, or you open yourself to learn from other people. I feel like that's the thing. We have to work on people to be open to learning from others. But Xavier, from your perspective, how do you see companies being able to continue on this ongoing education and dialogue?
Yeah, so I come from an intelligence standpoint. And so for me, it is understanding proactiveness rather than reactiveness. I think we are in a culture of being reactionary to things. So we wait up into 3 weeks out from Black History Month to program Black History Month, rather than thinking about, okay, these things happen all year. You're going to have AAPI Heritage Month. You're going to have Jewish American Heritage Month, etc. How can you make this a part of our culture here at this workplace rather than stagnate it to months? And so I think finding ways to get different populations talking, different groups talking, getting people in rooms together that often wouldn't be in the same conversation with one another. And that can be based out of, if you're in the finance office, in your HR office, y'all might not talk to each other often, but you could put on and maybe sponsor one of these months together and think about something of like, okay, so actually we're not going to just sponsor a month, we're going to do a 3-month spread of activities over the next 3 months to bring people into Juneteenth and Black History Month so people can learn more about it. And I think also to make sure companies stop looking at it just as quantitative data. You also have to see, yes, there's our core competencies, things are really going against our performance management, but people's humanity and people who we are shouldn't always have to be measured in that way. I think we have to be hungry to get to know people and be open to people's experiences because that diversity of thought is going to push our missions forward rather than if we're just stagnated by saying, okay, well, all the African Americans get back into your little box right now because the month is over.
100%. And somebody put in the Q&A, they submitted this anonymously, like a lot of times they feel like these diversity months could increase tokenism in some way and be performative in terms of, fake allyship and how that may show up in companies and may appear that we're this inclusive environment, or the scramble for the last minute to hurry up and plan something for Pride Month or for Black History Month, when y'all know this is happening the same time every year, but also kind of thinking, how can we really make impactful measures that will show up and return throughout the year, right? In terms of changing people's behaviors, or at least getting to the point of widening their scope and their lens and understanding, listening to their coworkers, and believing coworkers when they say things, but also being open to hearing from other people's lived experiences. I wanted, somebody also put something in the chat around how do we make sure that this DEI fatigue, right? I feel like there's a lot of people talking about just being overwhelmed as a DEI practitioner and feeling like all of these months, every time something happens, maybe in the political landscape, you have to respond to it, external things that are happening, internal things that are happening in organizations. How can we directly and transparently deal with the DEI fatigue that so many practitioners kind of hold in their organizations? Any thoughts on that to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'd say on DEI fatigue, if you're the only one holding the torch, you're going to burn out. So it has to be spread out throughout the organization and have ownership throughout the organization, all the way from top to bottom. And that will help alleviate some of the burnout. It's not going to go away because it's always been a charged topic. But I would say leverage your allies, going back to allyship, leverage your allies, leverage your employee resource groups or your business resource groups for support, definitely. And take care of self as well.
Implement resiliency officers, trained practitioners that are there to, one, help the workforce in entirety deal with tragedy and trauma and whatnot, but also for professionals such as ourselves to protect our mental health. I don't think people realize the emotional toll and taxation that happens to the body through doing DEIA work, because I think I like to say people see DEIA as soft skills and vibes when we are science and tradecraft. And so there's a lot more to our jobs that people don't get to see. I would say special emphasis months and training are maybe 10% of our job. The rest is a lot deeper, and sometimes we walk home with the feelings of employees around us, not just our experiences. We become other people's therapists, and like every other therapist has a therapist, we need someone in our corner too.
1,000%, Xavier. I feel like a lot of the work that I do, even as a DEI advisor with our office, is being able to be a thought partner for our DEI leaders in many organizations where they are party of one. Like their department is one person, like there is no one under them. It's not even an intern sometimes. And it is about kind of how do you have no space to share that weight with someone else when you're working in a silo. And some people are connected to HR teams and some people aren't. Some people are literally on an island by themselves where any other team, there are other people working on that team, so they can kind of share that responsibility, or even when there's a hard day, be able to vent. And sometimes people don't always have that space for it. I think one of the things around um, long-term success around talking about intersectionality and allyship is really about ensuring that you have policies and practices that are inclusive and supportive of your organization's needs, your employees' needs. As we talk about long-term, what people can do just beyond any type of honorary commemorative month or week or day, how can organizations take steps to ensure that their policies, practices, and benefits are inclusive and supportive of intersections of LGBTQ persons, Black identities, and other elements of diversity that maybe people don't think about as often, to ensure policies and practices and benefits are supportive of often marginalized communities?
I can take that one. I would say start from a place of inclusion. If you're asking for input from the marginalized communities to make sure that their voices are heard or reflected in your policies and your practices and your benefits, then you'll end up in a place of inclusion. So make sure you have touchbacks to your employee resource groups. If you have them, if you don't, leverage surveys or listening sessions or market research, like find out what's best in class and what you're trying to accomplish, if you don't have any of those internal resources. So you can start from a couple of different places.
I mean, inclusion is the equity piece to that too. Are you building these policies and procedures to be for all people or a certain type of person? And so, because in the process of also trying to be inclusive, you could be unintentionally exclusionary as well. So making sure that the work is accessible and inclusive of all, while making sure that you are breaking down systems and future proofing the policy for those who might come into the organization from different standings. It's very different from an intern to look at a policy and a senior leader to look at a policy. So if they both look at that policy, are they both getting the same thing from it and can understand that, oh, this is how I'm protected or what I can and cannot do because of it? If that is the answer for broadly the organization, then you've met that equity piece, and you've made sure that it's an inclusive document.
Most definitely. And I think it is always the lens in which you are seeing things. We have our own particular lenses we're seeing things through. So asking people for input is important. There's been a lot of people, oh, well, what do we think they need? What do we think? Or we think they need this. We need to go ask people what they need, particularly around benefits. That's so important. We've had many discussions on this platform and talking about how can we provide different benefits to people or different parts of their lives, whether that is family benefits, whether that is supportive of elder care and things of that nature. How do we make sure people have what they need in certain times of their life, which is not a race thing or even a gender thing. It can happen we will need these things at any point in time in your life and span of your life. So just really tapping folks to ask, what do you need? I think so often organizations are scared to ask, what do you need, or how can we get better, or what are your real thoughts about what's going on? And that's when people start making up stories in their head about what they think other people need because they're fearful of getting the real answer. One of the things in the chat, someone was saying, Juneteenth is a federal holiday. It's an awesome opportunity for multiple connections. Can you talk about the concept of indoctrination when there is disagreement about the success of the company? And I think maybe this will tie into our next question of what maybe folks see successful in terms of DEI efforts and programming, and how maybe there are some groups who think things are going well, but there are other groups who are saying in disagreement. They do not think things are going well in terms of maybe diversity of persons. How do you manage those differences? There's a lot of DEI things happening in a lot of organizations, and there are people who they are giving rave reviews, but there are other employees who are in disagreement in terms of if they're very successful or not. Any thoughts on that?
I would say you have to know what success looks like. I think you touched on it, Dr. Tiffany, to say, how do you measure success? What is your North Star? What are you trying to get to? And how are you being transparent about how you're setting those goals? Are they using data from the census, or, if it relates to number of people of color or any specific demographic group within the company, like how you came up with that goal or target? I know that's kind of a touchy thing in a DEI space, like setting hard goals for things. But the alternative is to have it like an aspirational target. Where do we want to be? This way we can continue to trend and to work toward that particular target. And if we don't hit the target, but we still see growth, that's still success. Is that still success? So just, I guess, level setting and remaining transparent with your employee base to say where you are and where you're trying to be, and also listen to their input as well. And we touched on that a little bit earlier, to say, well, what is your expectation? And then manage that expectation. Maybe it's unrealistic. We want to see, 70% women on the board or something like that. And, maybe it's not achievable due to whatever reason, maybe the industry, maybe, whatever it might be. But just managing expectations of your employee population and setting transparent and achievable goals or targets, or aspirations, or however you want to outline those within your company.
Yeah, and I would add that it is also, what is the narrative of your company versus the storytelling of your company. I think we all get into storytelling mode of, okay, well, this is not going to make us look good. You make yourself actually look poor when you don't tell the true story. I would much rather and have much more faith in a company if I knew, okay, cool, they said they messed up on this. They said they're not doing this great. As an employee or a consumer, I would say, awesome, they're moving forward. However, if you are trying to surge in and microcut and create a narrative that isn't true, that is where people, I sometimes feel, get lost about DEI and why it's not working, because in a lot of ways it's quote unquote politicized to be something that it's not. Rather than a tool to better the organization, people use it for divisive means, to tell a story that they do or do not agree with.
Yeah, and we see that play out in the news. And I feel like that is one of the ways that, external things that are happening beyond our control as DEI practitioners is influencing our work, right? Because people hear what different governors of certain states believe about DEI, and they see it as somehow they're, going to be isolating a group of people, or this isn't the narrative that we want. We only want this kind of single story, when we know nothing is the single story. We are not, this, only look this way, only sound this way. And I think that is the biggest part of our conversation today in intersectionalities, is understanding people will have multiple identities that they have under one umbrella, whether it is sexual orientation and race, gender, however you want to show up, socioeconomic status. It's all these elements of difference that package who we are. And often some organizations, and I would love your thoughts on this too, during programming, people are saying, why do we have to have these things? Why should we have ERGs putting on these events? Why is that important? And we know learning is important, but how do we believe that we can kind of encourage everyone to be a part? Or from a DEI practitioner lens, do you feel like, is your goal to help one person change their behavior, or is the goal to change everybody or help everybody want to buy in to attending these events? Because I feel like attendance at some of these events are connected to what success is seen at some of these organizations. So how do you, in your work or in your experience, kind of win over some folks who have been very rigid in their ideologies and not really wanting to be open to learning about folks who are different from them?
I'll go first on this one. I don't. And so I know that sounds bad, but I cannot allow for those who want to create space I cannot put at the expense of psychological safety other people's feelings. If you're making a space psychologically unsafe, I cannot go out of my way to try to make you feel as if you have to be a part of everything. If you don't want to be included, that it's okay. Sometimes you can self-select out of a process. That's intentional exclusion. You're doing that to yourself. However, we cannot create a culture where people are being intentionally excluded by saying that none of their history, none of their body, nothing that they experience can be validated in the workplace because it made one or two people uncomfortable. I always say this in this way: when you think of like school plays, everybody had, your mom and dad could say, you don't got to do the school play, but other moms and dads want all their kids to do the school play. It's just these same concepts we've been dealing with since we were children. And so I think sometimes we as adults um, problematize people's experiences rather than realizing their humanity. And so in this work, it is hard to hear all the negativity because it bogs us down. I have to stay focused on those who want to see that change, who want to see the steady state, who wants to drive the mission. Because to me, DEIA is statecraft in my element of work. And so if it can't be seen that way, I have to look at those who are trying to see it that way. Because at the end of the day, that is what, at the bottom line, when I have to go before Congress, someone is going to look toward, not that one or two people were upset and did not attend an event.
100%.
Yeah, I would say, Dr. Xavier, those are some great points. Like, you can't win everybody over. Like, people are going to make it a priority, and some people are not. So you can present them with the same opportunities and access, and they can accept those and leverage those and take advantage of all those opportunities and see them for the benefit that it'll provide themselves as well as the company by having all of those collective voices in a room to drive better collaboration, better teamwork, more innovation, like all of those things that were already proven as returns of an investment. So we can continue to drive those, but not let it derail us from our goal of creating an overall inclusive environment for all of our employees.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we have another question on the Q&A chat, which there's been a lot of discussion around how DEI intersects with tech. And this question is around, do we think AI can be used to help companies in allyship in a more streamlined and integral way versus tokenism and performative allyship? Do we see technology being able to help us in our work as DEI practitioners? Any random thoughts on that?
I will preface this by saying I am not a technology expert, but I will, I definitely stay close to the conversation as we see emerging technology and, artificial intelligence. And the story is, as it's always been, it's only as good as what gets put into it. So if it has biases put into it, biases will come out of it. So I think we have to keep them in mind as we leverage technology to support our DEI efforts.
I agree with that. And I also think that human connection cannot be replicated by technology. And so while, yes, the human feeling, I think in the DEI space in the future, it could be really cool for creating experiences. And that's what I feel like AI, when it's not just, typing, but actually like immersive experiences, that is when AI will have a space for DEIA to show people, okay, this is actually sometimes how a person might be feeling or what that world would look like. It can show you the possibility and innovation. But currently, as it stands in that emerging technology, I think we're too nascent to say that it could be very impactful for the DEIA field.
100%. I think, everything is moving so fast, right? Things that we thought, and, we didn't think a year ago certain things are going to happen, and here we are. So we will see how that looks and how the checks and balances that may be there. We know technology has been very helpful for us. Like, where would we be without Google? Where will I be without, certain technologies, assistive technologies for persons who have disabilities? It has advanced them being able to really improve their practice in any kind of way and connecting and being able to get daily things done. I think only time will tell how DI will be able to be supportive with AI. But we do have another comment in the chat of saying that it's sad that some will be left behind because they disagree or fear that DEIA disagree or fear DEIA, but their choice must be respected. And I think that is very true. It is sad that some people may not ever come on board to any of these initiatives, and they may be like, well, no, I don't want to. But understanding that it is the element of choice, and no one's forcing anyone to participate in some of these activities. But I do think that it brings me down to kind of my final question is about accountability measures, right? What accountability measures can companies put in place to ensure that their allyship efforts are effective, sustainable, and result in positive change for all marginalized communities? Can we have a manager that's like, forget DIA, I'm going to ignore the whole thing? What accountability measures, if companies are serious about this work, can be put in place to really result in this positive change for marginalized communities?
I would say I touched on it a little bit earlier. Just have those targets that you want to reach as a company and set it like business goals. Everyone's accountable for the success of the business in their own avenue, in their own department. Put the lens of DEI on the person's role. This way they can see how it relates to them specifically in their department and their job and for the company overall, and show how it lends to the success of the company, to their department, to their relationships and collaboration and things like that. So the same way we measure business success, we should measure similar ways. In all ways, it can't be measured in the same ways, but to Dr. Xavier's point as well, right? There are some measures in DEI that cannot be measured in the same way, but I think people will latch onto it a little bit easier if it's more tangible, if it's something that says it's we're trying to achieve this and we're getting there.
And I would add to that from a federal and a corporate standpoint, contracts and oaths are very important. I think often people from a government standpoint forget that when you come in, you take an oath to protect all people. The same thing is in a company. You sign this contract that you're going to do what is best for this company at all ends, blah, 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 blah. If that is attached to your recruitment efforts and your hiring practices, you can actually find ways to ensure that if people aren't following through with that, you can ask them to step away from the company because they are contractually and or oath or under obligation to follow that. If you're not making a safe and inclusive environment for people and you're making people uncomfortable or you're making a person feel unsafe, I can't ask you to leave my company. And I think sometimes it takes the company having to have a little bit more firmness on DEIA and not being as scared about it, because at the end of the day, those people that you keep there are going to support you. And so if you're making sure that that's an inclusive environment for all persons, you will not have other people who are like, oh, I don't care. Because a manager shouldn't have that luxury to make someone feel as if their humanity is something that should be on the back burner. They're here to lead a team, not just run programs.
100%. And I think it brings us to kind of this next level of now that we're living in remote work. Someone just asked, how do we, and you may never go to the office, right? So how do you tackle what allyship looks like in remote settings? Um, there are, in my opinion, benefits and disadvantages of working remote. I think that social capital is important, and sometimes you miss that by working in a remote setting. But often people talked about not having to deal with as many microaggressions when they were working in a remote setting, and they felt more comfortable being at home. Any thoughts on what allyship may look like when you may be working with people who, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I don't see those groups of people, or I don't interact with with those people, so I forget about them. Any thoughts about how folks who are working in organizations can tackle that, how allyship looks remotely?
I think allyship remotely can look very similar to how it does in person. I think the expectation would be for, whatever the dominant, we'll call it diversity dimension in the workplace, however that looks in your organization, because that looks different everywhere. If they're tasked with growing diverse teams and elevate and amplifying the voices of those that are marginalized, or that need more support on their team, then they can do that from a remote perspective, because then they have the ear of more senior leaders. So use their influence, their power, their, whatever you want to describe it as, but with platform, use it to elevate the voices. And that can happen from a remote perspective or in person.
I agree with that. And I would add that it should be out of sight, but still on my mind mindset. And getting to know and having an expectation that even if you have remote coworkers, that you know those coworkers, and vice versa, they know you. And I think that social capital doesn't have to be diminished because you're not in the same space. It actually should, in some ways, be increased because you have to go a little bit further to get to know someone. And I think it's just putting that into our business practices and making that a part of our business acumen, that we treat those workers very similar than we treat the workers that you see every single day. Are you calling them? Are you doing a cold call just to see how someone's family is doing? Or, hey, I saw you ask this question on this task. Can I talk to you more about it over the phone? Like, doing those little bitty things lead to allyship. It doesn't have to be these grand acts that happen every moment.
Yeah, and I think that human perspective, I think we often are so rushed to just do different tasks and get things done that there is still a human element of connecting with each other that can never be replaced. And being able to, whether that's talk to someone on the phone or meet with someone for a cup of coffee, it is still something that needs to happen to be able to build relationships and rapport with our teams. At this time, I do want to share our recertification credits for folks. I know some folks have tuned in. These are the codes here on the screen. I want to thank our panelists, Kia, Xavier, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with everyone today. And shout out to everyone who has put all wonderful, thoughtful questions in the chat. We've got a lot of positive feedback, great conversation, great talk, powerful voices. People are saying thank you for honest, informed perspectives. We really encourage folks to continue to participate in our webinars. We'll be taking a short break for the summer, but we'll be back in September with more amazing panelists to close out the end of the year. And we are grateful for everyone and their time. Any final thoughts from Kia or Xavier? Maybe we didn't get to touch on something that you may want to share with folks.
No, I think this was wonderful. Me and Kia have this thing. Who's gonna go first? But no, I was beyond grateful for this discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you
same
so
here. I echo that. It was a great opportunity, and thanks for the opportunity to talk on the panel.
Yes, perfect. So this, when you register, you will get a link when this recording is posted to our website. So feel free to share that with folks that you feel like maybe didn't make the call today. And we appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and have a great rest of your day wherever you may be.